Is on our impact fee study update, and I believe we should have all the documentation, our options, the study from Tyndall Oliver, and then the ordinance language from Mr. Greenwater. Is that correct?
And you also have a copy of the study that GOBA did as well.
Correct.
And then a response from Tyndall Oliver regarding their findings.
That was emailed to us.
Correct.
Correct, yeah.
That's not in it.
It's not in the PowerPoint, but it was in the additional documents. You have a stack. The stack of documents.
Under the study.
Yes, so loud.
So Dr. Pace?
Okay, thank you, Chairman Booth and members of the board. This afternoon, we are here to hopefully bring some resolution to our impact fee conversations that have been going on for the past several months. We've had an opportunity to seek stakeholder input from a variety of sources. We've looked at a variety of different things, and we kind of have a quick summary for you. All of the supporting data has been provided to you, both in the PowerPoint as well as in the supporting documents. Ms. Graber will walk through kind of what those options are. Mr. Kruppenbacher and Rhonda Blake will go through kind of like the potential definitions for vacation rental and short-term rental properties, should the board want to offer specific consideration to them. And then we will open it up for board discussion, public comment, and consensus building.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so first I just wanted to outline some of the options for consideration that we haven't necessarily come to consensus on yet, so we can kind of talk through and make some of those decisions as we move forward. So the first, as you all know, Tyndall Oliver's prepared the study based on the 5 residential categories. In the past, single family and townhome, multifamily, condo have been combined into the 3 categories, which is what we're currently assessing impact fees on. So you all did have some conversation previously on whether we wanted to go back to the 5 categories. Just wanted to highlight that as an option as we move forward between the 3 categories or the 5 categories. The next item was discussion about whether we wanted to allow a 100% exemption of impact fees if communities are going to deed restrict. That's not currently in practice. There are some options which Rhonda can get into, but that's just another consideration that has been discussed, is allowing a complete exemption for deed restricting for short-term rentals specifically. The third is whether we want to allow a reduced fee for the short-term rentals, and I know that's been a topic of conversation throughout this entire study. That's been one of the main drivers that we had asked our consultants to look at this go-round. So if we're going to move forward with a reduced fee, a couple of things we need to talk about is defining the criteria that would qualify for that fee. And our attorneys drafted some language which we'll present, as well as some considerations about whether or not that would need to increase the fees for other units, and we'll want to talk about our recommendation there. As far as establishing what that reduced fee might be for short-term rental units, as you know, Tyndall Oliver has previously presented 2 different options. One was looking at the West Side Overlay District. Thank you, Rhonda.
You're welcome.
One was looking at pulling the data from the West Side Overlay District specifically, which will include some short-term rentals and other non-short-term rentals, but it was just one data source that we were able to do to see what student generation rates would be to calculate a reduced fee. And if we were to use that data set, that is something that could be reviewed on an annual basis. So as things change, we would at least be able to keep our finger on the pulse of what those true student generation rates are. And then the other option would be to establish a reduced percentage, establish a reduced percentage of the countywide fee per residential category. So rather than it being its own residential category, it would actually be a policy decision just to reduce the countywide fees by a certain percentage rather than having them based on a specific data set. So those are a couple of decision points that we'll need to have discussion on as we go through the workshop today that will drive where we ultimately want to land with the fees.
And so now Mr. Kruppenbacher and Ms. Blake, we're going to kind of walk through the ordinance language that they've proposed to define what might a vacation rental property would be compared to a short-term rental property.
Everybody, you got a couple, we're dealing with this one with the yellow tab, which, Deborah, thank you for putting the yellow tab on it. We made changes in anticipation to give you leeway to go different ways, and Rhonda, why don't we, what you have in front of you is the existing ordinance with red line changes, and we have a couple of tweaks that have since arisen that we'll verbally go over with you. So Rhonda, go ahead.
So as Frank has explained, we just took the ordinance as it stands today and we've modified it to try to address the conversations that we've had over the past few months for vacation rentals and short-term rentals. With the key being whether or not there will be full exemptions for vacation rentals and a reduced rate for a short-term rental. So this ordinance has been laid out that we would create a third full exemption category. Today you have housing for older persons. You also have a full exemption for affordable workforce housing for essential personnel only. And now we would be adding a vacation rental full exemption. And then we've also added a section for a short-term rental reduced rate.
Can we ask questions we got, or you want to start? The exemption for the affordable housing, we have some criteria of when we can exempt that, right? Can you explain
Yes,
that, please?
it's actually one of the items on your full agenda this evening, but that criteria talks about a very, let me go back. So the county has an ordinance that defines what key essential personnel are that would be eligible for affordable workforce housing. And based on the county and the two cities' interpretation of essential personnel, if an applicant came in and met all that criteria for those key essential personnel, then we would afford them the same exemption we do for housing for older person. So it's very specific language.
But don't we still have an option, like if we have the need, is it there?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there was language within the ordinance for that exemption that said we had to have available capital resources to
Yes.
meet all of our needs.
All exemptions are designed that way in the ordinance. So even for your vacation rentals and for your housing for older persons, there's always the leading sentence about the capital resources have to be available. And if not, we could still deny an exemption.
Tell me how this works then, because our capital resources are not available for any of those right now.
It's in 2440.
So I'm assuming if you exempt one, or if you allow one, you allow them all.
So
You
all
can't
of your
pick and choose, right?
all of your exemptions start out on page 19, section 2442, and they say subject to the availability of other school board revenues to pay for this exemption, any residential construction that qualifies and meets the following requirements.
Well, I guess to help me understand this then, because if it's an adult only, we can afford it because there's no kids.
Right.
If it's a workforce, what do we call them?
Affordable workforce housing for
Affordable workforce
essential
housing,
personnel.
they do have kids.
Correct.
So to me, there's a difference. But
And we've never received an application for that criteria to
Yeah.
date, to be honest.
That's a little bit different than the
Straight
affordable housing push that's going on right now.
Correct. This is for key essential personnel. It typically will be your law enforcement, your medical professional,
Neither of which we can afford, by the way.
your fire personnel. So they
Right.
have to meet a certain essential personnel qualification to live there.
Okay, I got that. My question is though, to me, we today, I don't think we can, I don't want to get into the whole math of this thing, but today I don't think we can afford that. But does that mean then for the over 55 where there are no kids, that we'd have to say, then you have to pay it too, right? Or can we treat those two
They each have their own
examples
section.
differently?
Yes.
That's my question, I guess. to
They
you.
each have their own section.
You would base it on the requirements that exist in this ordinance for each one, and they are different.
Okay, so you can treat each piece
Yes.
separately? Okay.
Section 1, because I needed to double check this as well, Clarence, on page 19, talks about subject to the availability of other school board revenues to pay for this exemption. That's the section that addresses the affordable workforce housing. On the following page, page 20, you then move to section 2. where it says any residential construction that qualifies as housing for older persons.
Okay,
So it does not have the same criteria. Those are two separate
okay. I just
exemption
wanna make sure I
categories with
understood
different
how
provisions.
that
I
worked.
think that's important to clarify. Thank
And then
you.
vacation villas would now be, if you decide to
That's
go
his
that
third
direction, you would
Right.
have a third section, and they would also have
And
their
you'd
own
have to stay
criteria.
consistent along your lines within those exemptions.
Okay. But you could select one of those three, or two of those three, or three of those.
Because they stand alone, correct.
Okay, that's all I wanted to make sure I understood.
And then the other section that would be considered a new section is section 2448.
Hang on, just correct.
Sure.
There's a couple of words that have to be changed, like one talks about revoked, it should say intended
That's on page 4.
on page 4. And then on page
Or again, we got to
4
fix the
again,
numbering.
vacation rental, we went with villa. All right,
So number 34.
So we've got page 434 should be.
number 34 should be
There's two
villa
forms.
instead of
Yeah,
rental.
it's,
two page
we
fours
realize
as
there's
well.
several numbering issues we got to fix at the bottom of the pages, unfortunately. So for definition 34, where it says vacation rental, that should read vacation villa.
Right.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I'm on the right page now. What was the other word that was wrong?
Oh, on the page before, if you look at definition 28,
Yeah.
line 3, it says by the owner and revoked. We've been asked to change that to by the owner and intended for transient occupancy.
Owner,
And intended.
by the owner and intended.
Yes, for transient occupancy.
Sorry.
No problem. And then definition 34, it would be vacation villa in lieu of vacation rental.
Right. Okay, it's just about 20-foot wide, 48.
And then, so then the next change from the ordinance as it stands today is on page 25. It's item 3E. And again, it should say vacation villas instead of vacation rentals. It's at the bottom of the page, pretty much, item E.
25E. Yeah, it says.
So we struck through short-term rental villas, and we forgot to add in the word vacation villas. So we just forgot to
Vacation for
insert the
short-term.
word vacation, yes. So we have to correct that.
Okay.
Then page 26, letter I. We want to reword that, so this is quite wordy. This just came in today. It'll say a deed restriction notifies the owners or prospective owners that because students are not to reside in the property, the school board has no plans for transportation for the property. And that would apply to a community that receives a full exemption as a vacation
Wait,
villa.
What are you on, you're on page 26?
If you
20
receive the full exemption.
26I.
26I.
Can you read that again?
Sure. A deed restriction notifies the owners or prospective owners that because students are not to reside in the property, the school board has no plans for the transportation from the property.
Okay, right.
So in other words, we would not intend to provide transportation to a vacation rental community.
Right.
No, let's just say if
Vacation
it
villa.
happened,
Yeah, that you would think.
would there
that-
be some state law that said that you have to transport the kid?
Can you
Oh, yeah.
restate what
Yeah.
the change again?
A deed restriction notifies
Yeah, I wouldn't think a
the
local ordinance
owners
could prevent you from picking up kids that
or prospective
provide
owners
transportation.
Owners, prospective owners,
that because students
students, yep.
are not to reside in the property, the school board has no plans for transportation from the property.
Period, not 30 years is gone too.
Yeah, the rest of that would just be struck.
Has no plan, should it say will not?
Cannot say will not.
Yeah.
Cannot say
You
will
cannot
not.
have
Very
not,
good
will
for
not
that.
say will
Say
not.
that.
Yeah.
But
We-
you shall not.
But you shall.
Clarence, that was,
Sam, I.
that was our first language, then, or I looked at it we back into some potential problems.
Sure,
That's what
sure,
we
sure.
don't plan.
Okay.
Frank, I'm thinking that for the sake of our audience and others who might be interested, it would be helpful for you to walk through the criteria that you've outlined to qualify for a vacation villa if the board chooses to consider that.
Where would we start? What page?
So we would start at
25.
25.3, because that's all new language in the red.
What we said is, again, subject to the availability of other school board revenues to pay for this exemption. Residential construction that qualifies as vacation villas and meets the following requirements. They file with the superintendent an application for exemption prior to receiving a certificate of occupancy for the proposed residential construction. The application lists the name and address of the owner, the legal description of the vacation villa's property, evidence of compliance with applicable zoning and land use regs, evidence that the vacation villas are not designed or intended for permanent occupancy, including but not limited to the lack of availability of mail services, regulation which preclude guests from returning to a specific unit for future stays within 12 months of the stay, requirements for rental rate calculations to be made on a daily or weekly basis, sales and marketing materials which expressly provide that the permanent occupancy of a vacation villa is prohibited, a letter of commitment certifying the residential constructions identified within the application will qualify as villas and meet the exemption requirements of the education impact fee ordinance, a filing fee of $2,000, a recorded plat denoting the lots to be identified as vacation villas, a single business license tax for each residential dwelling unit proposed for exemption. The requirement will need to be maintained each year of the exemption, a deed restriction that notifies the owners or prospective owners that the district has no plans for transportation because kids are not to live there, a deed restriction providing that the lots are not eligible for homestead exemption for 30 years, that the owner will not file for one during that period of time. And we wanted to modify K to be a deed restriction board that may not be amended without the signed consent of the superintendent for the school board. We wanted to tweak that, saying they couldn't amend anything that relates to schools. Meaning they can amend if they want a blue yard or a white fence or a yellow fence. It's just the school ones that they can't amend without our.
I got a question. Going back to the
Yes.
deed restriction on homestead. The deed restriction specifically, the lots are not homestead exempt for 30 years, the owner will not file. What's the penalty if they do file?
Well, therein is the interesting question. All right, we met with the property appraiser.
Right.
Who can put in there a system to notify us if somebody applies. We would have to challenge the exemption. We would. So, I mean, nobody else is going to step in to help us on this stuff. And that would be the extent of the penalty to get it revoked. Now, we could build in that, and if it's found that you violated this, the owner agrees to pay a $10,000, a $5,000, or whatever you
And
want
our
to build
fees,
in.
whatever
And our fees.
whatever it
So
costs
if you want
us.
that, we can build that into it as they're obligated to pay if they try it.
Okay, now I've got another question. Going back to E on page 25. A letter of commitment certifying the residential construction identified with the application will qualify as a vacation villa and meet the exemption requirements. What is the difference? And maybe there is something very clear. What's the difference between in the construction of a regular multi-family unit versus a vacation villa or a single-family home or a vacation villa? What's the difference in construction?
The vacation villa will be more of the resort-type amenities, such as a magic villa versus the independent single homes.
But what stops the single-family home or for a guy deciding he wants things built in his house?
Well, it's the community and the way they'll lay out their covenants and restrictions.
But what's that got, I don't understand what that's got to do with the construction.
Well,
I think you're right.
say that again, sir.
I just said I think he's right.
I mean, it sounds
That could be
good.
one of the things that we would need to further define.
It's
then.
fairly innocuous.
Mhm. It is one of the difficulties in trying to build the language to separate the two is
I'd rather make
because a
the-
residential unit
I'd rather
is
make the
really a
filing fee
residential use
$3,000,
it.
and they gotta
Right.
show something in the construction showing why it's not, why it can't be used as a single family. I mean, if we've gotta do that kind of review on construction documents.
I think if you put the penalty here and you discuss it, I'd strike C, because I don't think the county's got anything that's specifically gonna say that's a vacation villa versus that's this. It's really
They permit
what
types,
becomes the
not
ownership
uses.
restrictions, et cetera. So I don't think you need that.
I don't know how you prove, I don't know what the difference in construction
No,
is.
without that, I'm unaware of it, so I would knock that out, and I would put in, though, a penalty that if somebody did file, and we had to go through the expense of challenging it, that they pay our attorney's fees.
I wouldn't even make it 30 years, just in, it's kind of like you're pregnant, or you can't say you're never gonna be pregnant, then it's a maternity.
Well, it is for 30 years.
I would tell them they can't do it ever.
Well, no, because at the end of 30 years,
Things
you will
happen.
have picked up.
You've been collecting ad valorem.
Exactly, you would have
Pretty hefty
collected.
ad valorem for 30 years.
And impact fees
They're
are
kinda
based on
bought
the
in.
30-year life expectancy of the home.
I had a question regarding letter B. Restrictions will preclude guests from returning to a specific unit for future stays within 12 months.
I had that same question started
I mean-
today. What is the purpose of that?
I
You can't
agree.
say in 704,
Say
you
where-
know,
which
705.
B.
It's B,
It's-
4B.
It's kind of hoping that it doesn't become what I call a
And I understand
traditional
the-
rental.
Yeah, and I understand the
unit.
purpose, I just don't think that that's I don't agree with that language. I
Maybe
mean,
somebody
many-
wants to spend Christmas and summer
And
vacation.
so,
Yeah, I mean, they buy one of these guys' homes and they vacation there to that point, and they like the property, like the amenities of the property, they want to come back again. I mean,
As long as they're not sending the kids to school,
yeah. And by the way, I understand, Frank and Rhonda, I understand what you guys are doing and what you're trying to do. You're trying to put some definitions around this to make sure that the board understands, the building community understands what the intent of what we're trying to communicate is. And I know that that's a very difficult thing because you're trying to create a space here that doesn't already exist.
Right.
But I would also say is, and the intent of that language is good, but the mechanics, like, because I know what your intended outcome is, but the mechanics of that just honestly doesn't work. I mean, I wouldn't support that.
We have it in short-term rental in the definition for no more than 30 days within a 12-month period for those. You're okay with that? Now moving over to the vacation villas, I think that the reasoning or rationale, Tim, and there's no pride of authorship in that, the language is, how do we prevent it from turning into a long-term rental with kids? And I guess you could take this position that if we have the rest of it, trying to argue the rest of it and the penalties, doesn't matter if they stay 45 days, if they can't have kids, et cetera, and if you find they have kids, then we deal with it. I think we carried it over from the vacation rental thing as a.
I guess nobody's ever gonna look at it unless it's a problem with kids coming to school anyway.
Well, that's the truth too.
But if you got somebody out there that wants to stick to the letter of the law, they can make it. I mean, I can see people, I know people that come here 2-3 times a year.
And I will tell you this, if we're not
Want
gonna
that.
enforce it, I would tell you, don't put it in there. Because one of the counter arguments is, when you go to enforce something, particularly when it comes to property and covenants and restrictions, one of the things you get asked is, have you consistently enforced it? And if the court hears no, then they get into, well, then I'm not, a lot of judges will go, I'm not enforcing it.
I don't think we're any less solid without that being in here.
Yeah, I think
So
we
what I've
should
heard
do that.
consensus, I believe, is that we would strike letter B and strike letter E under the
Right.
vacation villa definition.
Right.
But understand, board, that if you decide that this is the direction you're going, this type of a deed-restricted property could potentially qualify for 0 impact fees, if that's the direction that you as a board decide you want to go. Do you want to look then at the definitions that Frank and Rhonda have come up with for short-term rental for a reduced fee consideration? It's on page 31.
But I just want to stop because, we've been having these discussions. Currently, if you deed restrict a 55 and older or a rental property, a short-term, or is there no deed restriction for a short-term
No,
rental? There
not
isn't.
right now.
But currently, if you deed restrict to 55 and older, you do not have to pay.
Correct. If they meet the criteria in the existing impact fee ordinance, that is correct. They meet
So-
yeah.
This creates a deed restriction. Essentially, the ordinance is creating a deed restriction for vacation villas.
To receive 100% exemption.
This
To
would
receive
enable them to
100%.
qualify for an exemption without an impact fee study, which is very expensive. Under the current process, if one of these came in, they'd have to go do an impact fee study and then apply for it.
Okay.
An
Yep.
alternative.
And these
study.
are not short-term rentals, they're vacation villas.
Vacation villas.
Which is separate.
This is separate, yeah,
Yes.
correct. I'm sorry.
This
I
is
didn't-
more of the resort.
Right.
That's what we're trying to get to here,
Right.
is something that meets more of that
Correct.
resort definition of a true, fully deed-restricted property that's not supposed to ever convert and have kids. That's the premise.
And if you,
The
yes, sir.
policing mechanism of that, if you have somebody that's, under the age of 55, living in a 55-plus community, there's naturally built into that community a process to identify the violation and address it.
They police themselves, you're
Yeah.
right.
And I think that's our challenge that we're trying to figure out is the policing mechanism of this to
And
make
then
sure
the
that somebody
security.
doesn't take advantage of the taxpayers of Osceola County by not paying their impact, or applied impact, I should say, and then ultimately having somebody move in. And have we looked at the language or how, how these guys are writing their deed restrictions to the 55-plus for the internal management and policing of that?
But
And is that
that-
not?
The 55 and plus, though, the people who are buying the homes don't want 55 and under next door.
If
You
you
go to
look
a
at
short-term rental
They have
area,
federal
there's nobody there that
requirements
cares
that
what's
enforce
next door,
them.
because I'm only there for a week anyway.
Oh my gosh.
You know, it's kind of self-policing, just naturally goes away.
Look, can we try to address that when I was working with this? If you look at paragraph B at the bottom,
B of what?
On page
B on page
26,
26,
26?
what we basically say is,
at the very bottom.
if we notify them that there's a student, they have a cure period of 60 days in which to get the matter fixed. And if they don't fix it, then the homeowners association pays the full impact fee to us.
For that one residence.
Yeah, we limit it to that resident.
No, I'm okay. I just wanna make sure
We
I
actually
was
had a
clear.
discussion, and I said, look,
Yeah.
if one person out of 300 units violates it, it's pretty unreasonable to look and say to the homeowners, you're now paying
$3 million.
because of you for 299. So we put that in there. Beyond that, there's an exceedingly difficult time of figuring out, other than if you build in horrific penalties and people realize, my God, this could be terrible if we did it, but.
Is it gonna cost more to impose the impact fee when we find a house with those people there through our attorney fees and court process than we collect in the impact fee?
No, I think we'll build in a provision that for attorney's fees that are in the deeds, and we do it that way. I fully anticipate with the inability, that the homeowners association will step up and solve this issue if we identify. All right. But I want everybody to realize that the reality is, these are people like we are, and if their grandchild has a problem, or their brother has a problem, and they say, give us your daughter for a while,
It's gonna happen,
it's gonna happen.
probably a good thing.
That's why we suggested at the last meeting, our plan at the staff level would be to come to you and monitor, to do another survey in a year on these, to see how's it actually flushing out?
I got a
Is it
question.
working?
I got a question.
Yes.
I'm gonna go back to the homestead. So can we make it as part of the requirements that when these owners, developers, et cetera, sell vacation villa, a vacation condo, whatever it is, that whoever the purchaser is, in the documents, they've got to sign a document stating that they're clear they cannot file for homestead from 30 years from the date of closing. So that way, we got it in writing from that, at the closing table, just like everything else. Can we add that to it? So that way that we, instead of just, it's in there, this way, that person who bought it, and then if it's conveyed anytime within that 30-year period to somebody else, they've got to also sign on the dotted line. They understand this was executed on date X. Now they've got X, X minus. So that way, we're in a much better position should we have to enforce.
I don't know that we're really in much better position one way or the other, because it's in the documents and you acknowledge you got them and they were read and received and reviewed. I'd ask, from a realtor standpoint, I think my issue would be, you got a lot of paperwork moving around to close something. Does that really do anything in terms of the closing?
Yeah, it protects us.
If you're going to allow time for comment.
Board in the,
Basically, that he's asking.
I was going to ask to qualify the question before.
We actually do it with HOPA.
With
We
what?
just-
With the housing for older persons,
I
you
mean,
have them
just
sign
ask
an
your son-
older
We
acknowledgement
just could
form
create
as
a
a
simple
secondary.
one-page form that they clearly acknowledge to us when they close on the property, that they recognize that this property is not eligible for homestead
30
exemption.
years.
For a period of 30 years expiring on the.
And then,
whatever date
and
it is.
if they convey it to somebody else, that they also
Yeah, and it
have to
runs
sign
the
out
plans, so.
whatever the
Let
balance.
me make sure I understand that. So we're actually allowed to tell somebody they're not allowed to file for homestead exemption, a
No.
benefit afforded to them through state law?
Yeah. No. I had this.
With this
That's why-
exemption, with this exemption they are.
That's
Yeah,
why
yeah.
I'm a little.
Ken, let me go there, because he's jump with work. We said very clearly, they acknowledge they're not eligible for homestead exemption. They can go down from file it, we'll get notified, and we'll say they're not eligible, and we'll deal with it then. But I don't think we can tell them they can't go down and file that document.
If they sign a paper set, is that they acknowledge.
That they acknowledge the property's not
We're in a better-
eligible
we're in
for
a better
homestead
position
exemption.
to enforce.
That's different than saying to them, you don't have a right to go
Kelvin,
file a piece of paper.
well, I know we've got some more questions on this, but if we don't move on to the short-term
I need
rental.
to ask this question.
All right, one last question.
This is, actually, I'm gonna revisit Mr. Weeder's question on what are distinguishing features in the housing for older persons.
They're meeting the federal, set aside by the federal for 55 and older. So
Okay.
that's really where we get the guidelines for that. So we get the extra enforcement of the federal. Because there's grants and other awards usually affiliated with those communities. And if they don't abide by those federal guidelines, they'll lose their grant money and any funding that they receive to build those communities. So they have more reason to protect and police their own communities.
And so those things are not existent in anything that we're talking about right now.
No, because remember, Jay, he's hitting the big point. A residential unit is a type, and that's what you build at a county. And we're now talking about a use. And there are no guidelines in the statutes or anywhere that tell you what the use of a home is. And that's why it's really difficult for staff
We're
and the
creating that
assistance
here.
of the rental community to help us define them, because there will be no statutes really to go behind you like the federal statutes for housing for older person or even affordable workforce housing if the language just isn't there for a use. It's either a residential, multifamily, condo, timeshare, or a mobile home kind of concept. And now we're trying to dig it down and separate it out into something that the language doesn't
Orange
exist
And
for.
finally, that's what this ordinance is trying to accomplish.
We're trying to write a definition that doesn't truly exist in the statute.
Dealing with it. Orange County Schools is calling us, asking us.
Yeah.
As far as the physical creation of the structure, it could look like anything the market would bear.
Correct.
Today, it's one thing, 5 years from now, it's something
Right.
else, 20 years, it looks completely different.
Correct.
But for the housing for older persons, that's not the
Board, let's
case.
move on to
No,
the
that is-
short-term rental
it'd be the
section of
exact
the
same
ordinance now.
No. Housing for older
Frank,
persons.
Physical
are-
structure could be the exact same.
But there's language in statute that
Yeah.
stands behind affordable workforce housing, yes.
Page we're going to.
That helps us
So if
with
you'll
our
look on
guidelines.
page 31, board members.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
This is the second consideration for whether or not you offer a reduced fee for properties that meet some criteria for short-term rental usage, but may not necessarily have the same level of deed restriction that a vacation villa, as defined in the previous section, would have. And Mr. Kuppenbacher will walk through those.
Rhonda, you want to roll? Go ahead.
Frank's asked me to go
Okay.
through it real quick. So basically, it starts off the same way that any residential construction that qualifies as short-term rental and meets the following requirements will be entitled to pay a reduced rate for a short-term rental dwelling unit as calculated in the latest school impact fee update study. Any person seeking the reduced short-term rental rate shall file with the superintendent an application for short-term rental prior to receiving a certificate of occupancy for the proposed residential construction. And the application for short-term rental shall contain the following: the name and the address of the owner, the legal description of the short-term rental property, evidence that the short-term rental is to be or is being marketed for short-term rental stays, further that the services of a property management company are being offered by the owner, evidence of the design of the development that discourages permanent residency by lack of availability of mail delivery, no county residential universal garbage pickup, increased resort-style amenities, increased parking considerations, and noise buffering. And then we go on to talk about a copy of their proposed declaration of covenants and restrictions that runs with the land that contain the following provisions, which cannot be revoked or amended for a period of 30 years from recording without permission from the school board. And it shall state restrictions that state that mailboxes or mail delivery shall not be available. Garbage collection shall be provided by a commercial hauler and not part of the Osceola County residential garbage collection. A property or homeowners association that oversees the increased amenities, facilities, and language that sets out that the development is intended for non-permanent occupancy. We're also requesting a letter of commitment certifying the residential construction identified within the application will qualify as short-term rental and meet the exemption requirements of the educational impact fee ordinance. A filing fee of $2,000, a recorded plat denoting the lots to be identified as short-term rental, a single business license tax for each residential dwelling unit proposed for exemption. This requirement will need to be maintained each year of the exemption. We want to strike 10. We were carrying the transportation language over. However, since impact fees do include transportation, we didn't feel we could strike it, plus they're paying a reduced fee. So we want to strike 10 altogether. 11, a deed restriction specifically providing that the lots are not eligible for homestead exemption for 30 years and that the owner will not file for
We're
one
striking
during.
that.
We do want to?
Yeah, strike that.
Okay,
They
strike
file.
11.
No, we just want to strike the second part that they won't file.
Oh, that they won't file,
Yeah,
okay. So we're going to do a deed restriction,
That's not eligible.
okay, specifically providing,
Right.
okay. And then 12, the same as with the vacation villas, we just want to go back and spell out that they can amend their deed restrictions, but not anything school-related without coming to the superintendent first. So we just want to do a little tweaking of that language to clarify it. And then, of course, if they meet these criteria, then the superintendent would sign off on the exemption. And then we have a process to send that information to the county or the appropriate city that would, then they put into their system to charge a reduced rate for the lots on the plat affiliated with this reduced rate
I just
application.
want to be clear on something. We're going back to number 11.
Mhm.
Are we striking all of 11 or just the last portion of it?
Just the last portion, I
Just
believe
to-
is
and that the
Mr.
owner will
Griffin.
not file.
Okay.
Okay.
I wasn't
So we're
clear.
going to stop at 30 years.
Again, I mean, provided that they're signing something at closing, knowing that they can't do it, and they
owner
acknowledge it.
acknowledgement. Okay,
I mean,
so add the owner acknowledgement.
yeah,
Okay.
in writing at closing, or at some point before they take ownership.
We have a form for that.
Okay.
Okay. And then on page 33, it's just some cleanup of some typos. And then, of course, we would change the month, date, and year because
Right.
currently to the rest of it. And then we'll add the appropriate attachments on the remaining pages.
Can we talk about the, I think this is where the effective date and the grace period?
So at the bottom of 33,
Yeah, what are we looking at as those dates?
Well, the effective date would be when the county formally approves the new ordinance,
In 90 days. There's a 90-day grace period by statute.
and then 90 days following that.
So if they, let's say they approved it January 1st, just to make this very simple. So April 1st, we could start collecting, or would start collecting. And we collect at the time of CO, right?
Yes.
I'm wondering if, so if somebody's already got a project underway, right today, and they don't get a CO in this same scenario until April 15th, they've got a whole project they've developed, built with a budget at an old rate structure.
Yes.
Is there a way for us to extend, if they have already permitted, they would get it? If somebody at this point permits on, and it gets approved January 1st, on March 29th, they're gonna know this is here, they kinda have some time. But if they're already halfway through their development project, it seems we're kinda hitting them possibly pretty good.
Well, but
Yeah.
Clarence, if you get somebody who does a phased development, you're right to a point. But if you're doing, if you've got a big development, say you're gonna do 5 phases.
I hadn't thought about it, you're right. And if, yeah, phase 5 in 2027.
Right, I'm not gonna give them today's impact.
But they also haven't permitted.
They haven't built the permit, right, but they got the entitlement. Okay, I got it.
The only
I don't know if I'm-
distinction-
I mean-
The only distinction I make, I agree with you philosophically, but this is talking about an exemption from the fee, not an increase of the fee. This portion.
Is
But
that
no,
what this
is-
portion, okay.
Now we're back to the full language
Right,
of the
this is
whole
right.
ordinance.
Okay, I thought this was,
Well,
So
for the
this
full
would be
ordinance.
This is,
Okay.
yeah, no,
Okay.
Clarence,
Yeah,
I
I
understand.
understand
Okay,
what
yeah,
you're
because I'm
saying
still
is-
in
Yeah,
this
we've moved
short
out
term.
of the
If
short-term
we were
rental
to
section.
take, you all took action on this,
yes.
and there was a developer who had a project that he was ready to pull COs or whatever, and the rate was gonna go down for that developer. Would there be a way to do this where that developer would be
I'm looking at,
entitled-
up saying, let's say I started building my home today.
Right.
I'm not gonna have a CO by April 1st, probably. And whatever I've planned on through my loans and everything else is gonna be different. What if I am on a very, very tight budget? It's kinda like you've already started this. I don't know, what do you?
I would just, I think you could certainly develop a grace period or outline a grace period to say if projects have been permitted and they close within a certain date.
Yeah.
But I don't want to
Okay.
think you want to
No,
leave that
don't wanna-
unending.
No, I don't wanna leave it-
Otherwise, we
Phase
would have a ton of
fives, you know.
people
And I-
filing for permits that they don't plan to build for 2 years.
And that's what I was not trying, that's why I was trying to find what that time period is where it's permitted. And you're right, if it's permitted by then and completed within X number of whatever the time period. I
6
don't-
months.
Somebody
or,
who's more
you know,
reasonable than I am.
90
I
days.
think that's very reasonable.
It's kind of picking a.
What are you not thinking, Tim?
No, I'm fine with what you're saying. I want to go back to the short-term rental language.
Oh, okay.
So
You understand what I'm
so
asking?
I
like-
understand. I'm trying to figure out, what you don't want to do is come up with a date that impairs your business partners. So I don't know what that date is sitting here, but I know there's got to be one that works for everybody or is close enough that everybody kind of meets in the middle. And so I think I'd leave it up to more brilliant minds to figure out what that date is and get some info.
And I'm fine with that, because I don't know, but what I want to do, like I say, let's just say I go out tomorrow and break ground on a house. I don't want to get a hit in June.
Yeah, if
that
you
I-
already built your model.
If I've already got a permit and I'm building, now, but I need to start building my house and finish it. I can't finish it in 2027.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's got to be finished by the end of 2018 or something. Permitted prior to and finished, or something, I don't know. Somebody can figure it out. That's my question.
So like permitted and CO'd by 2018, but just not,
No,
we're not.
permitted,
I don't know if 2018.
permitted, and I don't know if the
Yeah, I know.
2018.
Let-
Because that's a little more
Permitted
than
prior
6
to,
Let us
by,
hear from
Yeah.
Yeah,
our
sure.
business partners and come up with what
Yep.
that recommendation would be.
So I'm going to go back to page 31 under the short-term rental piece.
sorry, Tim.
No, you're okay. Under A3, one of the things it says is that the services of property management company are being offered by the owner. I don't think we can require that. Not everybody that's developing one of these communities has to offer property management services to the people that are ultimately be purchasing the properties. And I would submit that even just good examples would be a for rent by owner.
Tim, you talking about this one right here? A3?
Page 31.
31A3?
Yeah, the second portion. It says further that the services of property management company are being offered by the owner.
Okay.
I don't think that should be included. And I don't know, I mean, some of the guys that do some of this work from the development side are here, maybe they'll speak to that as well, but I don't think we can require that. I mean, you know, there's a business model out there right now for people doing, you know, vacation rentals by owner, for rent by owner, Airbnb type things. They're not utilizing a property management service in those instances. So I would have concerns with putting that language in place
They wouldn't be
there.
getting the exemption either, I don't think. So, you have anything else?
Yeah, I have two more.
Two more?
Well, one more. The other one just goes back to the same thing. It's paragraph 6. It's the same thing we talked about on the vacation villa one. The letter certifying the type of construction is being used is compliant. Again, a short-term rental home could look exactly the same.
It's the same argument, take it out.
Take
Yeah,
it out.
exactly.
6 goes?
Yeah.
6 go. So, we've got about, I'd say, we could probably push this thing maybe 15 or 20 minutes. But I know we have some.
We have a pretty full agenda for the
We do have a
facilities
full
workshop.
agenda, I know, at a 4 o'clock meeting. What I'd like to do now is open it up for public comment. I know we have some folks here, and somebody might want to speak. I'll actually keep the time on my phone. I'd ask if you would keep your comments to about 2 minutes. I know that's probably a little brief, but be quick, tell us what you need to tell us. We traditionally do not open up for public comment at workshops, but I think this is an important item, and we will do that. So if anybody wishes to speak, if you come forward right here in front of this monitor, I think we've got a little blue sign right there. If anybody would like to say anything. Steigerwald has some education to do with his commissioners. Other than that, we're all right.
Anyone but you.
We did not invite Ms. Thacker.
Well, I do. Ms. Thacker, you're more than welcome.
I will be very brief. On the policy question on the vacation villas, the deed restrictions will be built in that the property management company would be able to enforce would pay you all and not the owner. And then that way, the property management company could lien it. It's not homestead. They could actually foreclose. So you have an extra policy policing in there. So that should help you with the vacation villas. On the short-term rental, the only comment that I have, you cannot, some of them will be homesteaded because that's how you generate students. So on that one, the homestead piece needs to come out. Because of that, they are paying the reduced amount, but they are generating students, so it's the same argument as the bus transportation. So there will be homestead within the short-term rental. Joe Thacker, 390 North Orange Avenue.
So we would, you're right, Frank, we needed to
Oh,
strike all
Adams.
of 11.
Or
On the right.
2-3
Yeah,
Adams.
it's okay, it's
or-
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thacker.
Thanks, Joe.
So we
Is there anybody else from the audience? We've got about 10 minutes.
I'll all jump up at once.
Joe, can you come back up for a second? On the one on the short-term rental, and maybe I should really be asking Frank, but since you're here too, the comment on the short-term rental and the deed restriction, instead of
Which number you
striking it,
want?
page 3211, instead of striking it, what if it was that if it's being utilized as a short-term rental, it's not eligible for homestead exemption, but if it's not being used as short-term rental, it is eligible, to your point?
To my point, I could have, I could live in there with a homestead and not generate any students because I'm 55 and old. So there will be people that want to live there all the time that are not going to impact you.
Sure.
So, you know, I think that in the short-term rental part, you're gonna have problems with that homestead exemption. Because there are gonna be people that live there all the time and wanna utilize that exemption.
Explain to me then, because I'm very confused. Somebody can build on a lot next door to where you live And say, they can't say, well, I'm 55 and over, I don't have kids, so I don't want to pay it.
No,
That's why I'm confused.
no, don't.
You lost me.
I really am enjoying
You were a
it.
brave,
I
you were a
can't,
brave.
I can't vote on this anyway, but I can ask questions.
I was joking,
Yes, ma'am is the
Clarence.
answer to the question.
Yes, ma'am.
Now
I
we
was
now we know
obstructed by a
now we know
chair.
what you endure at home.
Clarence, speaking of rentals, I have a room available.
I just want to understand.
No, I think it's a valid question. Joe?
Yes, sir. So what I was saying is that in a short-term rental community, you will have some that live there full-time. They will want to utilize the homestead exemption.
Yes.
Okay, they're paying, every home is paying for that, even though every home is probably, your study
And
shows
as long as
will
it's a
not
low
be
percentage,
doing-
that's what the discount is.
Exactly.
Right.
My point simply was that if they're staying, if it's you and you're living in the home and it's in a short-term rental community, but you're not utilizing it as a short-term rental, then by virtue of the fact that you're living there, you qualify for the homestead exemption.
That's correct.
If I own the house next door to you and I'm in the exact same community, but I was using it as a short-term rental and not living there, my point would be that the language that Frank proposed would then apply, that you're not eligible based upon the way he has it written to apply for the homestead exemption.
And that's right, and that's what the property appraiser's office looks at.
Right,
They, each year. But I could be homesteaded one year and not another year.
Sure.
Depending on what my circumstances are, whether I want to be a short-term rental that year or not. So it'll change in your short-term rental community.
So I think this would be my point. I don't know that I agree with you that completely striking it is the right thing, but I think that you make a valid point that there are going to be instances where it may not be used for short-term rental, and thus homestead exemption should be a viable option, just like it is for everyone else.
Right.
But in the instances where it is, there still needs to be language built around that they wouldn't be able to.
They won't qualify for a homestead exemption if they
criteria for homestead
have a
exemption.
license, a business license. So if they have a
Okay, so
business
we're making
license,
the
they
can't
can't
have a
short-term
homestead
rental.
exemption.
The property appraiser's
Correct.
office isn't gonna give them their homestead
With a business
exemption.
license on.
How's the property appraiser know that he's got the business license? 'Cause
Because it's through the tax collector's office and they
Yeah.
share
They
that
search the
data.
file.
You go in there and look
That's
at
where I was
it.
going to, if they have a
That's
business
for
license tax on file, they can't have a
Okay.
homestead
Correct.
exemption.
Right,
Control over that.
Yes.
that's correct. And instead of, well, if you're gonna strike that whole the rental, or the property management, instead of saying they offer it, they recommend, that might be language that you wanna consider.
Back to number 3.
So Dr. Pace, we've got about, yeah, I mean, are we going to even discuss the rate structure here today? We've just about run out of time.
Well, sounds like we may have to revisit
Well,
it.
and that was gonna be my next question, Board. If we do not conclude this and have a final document that we vote on tonight, it may be actually a better discussion to talk about what our next steps are because we are
January
not
16th.
finished. Board, is that?
I would suggest that the board look back at slide 5 in our PowerPoint. And this is just for consideration. I don't believe that you have time to really give it justice or have quality discussion or seek public comment about it for now.
Page 10?
We beat this pretty good.
But that's entirely up to you.
Oh, when are we meet? January 16th?
Slide 5
It's like 5. Sorry, I'm looking wrong.
shows what basically staff in conversations with Tyndall Oliver and with our stakeholder groups has kind of come forward with as what would be our basic recommendation, depending on the wishes of the board. That would be to adopt a full countywide fee,
Yeah, that's not.
but not at the higher end. So in other words, not to use that west side overlay calculation to increase the other side. And you are taking a risk there in that the balloon is being popped one place and not necessarily escalating somewhere
That's correct.
else. But we all agree that our student generation rate data is the most valid and reliable we've been able to come up with in looking at the business license taxes and looking at the west side overlay property, in looking at even some of the newer vacation rental properties that we've done internally in-house. And there's no magic number for what is the student generation rate of a vacation villa, other than that we think is closer to 0, and a short-term rental, because those properties are very different in size and age and scope and use at this stage of the game.
This column, reduced short-term rental fee, would be what a short-term rental, single-family detached home would pay, correct? And the 11,800 would be a regular house.
Even inside the short-term rental overlay if it was not a short-term rental.
Okay.
Correct.
I just want to make sure I understood.
It is not staff's recommendation that you apply that west side calculation to everything in the west side area, because we know that some of those properties are not short-term rental properties. Celebration Isle is a classic example that's getting ready to come off the ground that will definitely be feeding us students. It
And
doesn't.
as we go forward, if we see, again, if our generation rates change in a year, 2 years, we're going to continually monitor. This
It would be
This
staff's-
fee may continue to go.
It would be staff's recommendation that we annually try to look at student generation rates specific to the short-term rental properties that are identified through our study and through the work of a vacation villa and short-term rental definition as you potentially will adopt in the ordinance.
So this proposal is to reduce short-term rental fee based solely upon the deed restriction language that we're talking about and ultimately approved, nothing to do whatsoever with the actual overlay boundary.
Page
Correct.
31 and 32.
It could be anywhere in the county that allows for that type of a property. Because even though right now it's restricted to certain sections, we know that potentially that will change.
I like it.
I'm fine with it. I've been on board with this.
I'm okay with this one. We need to bring it back on the
And this
16th.
is a small raise, I guess, then for your single family, a big raise for multifamily, which needed to happen, and in my opinion, and then some reduction in those split outs,
Between town.
which is townhomes and condominiums, which were kind of combined in some of the other categories before.
And remember, it was the recommendation of Tyndall Oliver, and staff certainly agrees that the mobile home rate should be consistent in both areas because there were some anomalies in how that worked out with the last study. And we know that there is not significant growth in mobile family units at this stage of the
Are there
game.
mobile short-term rentals out there?
Some, Sherwood Forest.
Oh, okay, sure, yeah, I didn't think about it. Okay.
The, looking at the graph provided, the NA column, does that represent the vacation villas?
That would be vacation villas.
If you were all okay with it, what we would do is tonight at the regular meeting, have you approve it, we'd read into the record the changes we're making, and then we'd get it ready and ship it off to the county, for the county to begin their process.
Or we can come back on January
Or
the
we can come
16th
back
after
with
you've
a
had
cleaned
additional
up
time to
version.
review.
Yeah,
With
I
the
was
cleaned up.
actually going to say, I would vote against this tonight if it was brought to me, just to be candid.
that's why we
I
do it
want
either way.
I want to really think through some more of this language conversation, some of the numbers. I definitely want to hear the viewpoint of the board tonight and kind of where their heads are at.
And plus, I like to see the cleaned up version, 'cause there was so much that we went over, cross this out, add this, and that, so.
So what I think I've heard from the board is that you'll trust Sarah and Rhonda and I to work with Frank on this language with some of the changes that you've said, to look at what a potential grace period might look like for permits and COs for projects that are already well underway. But we don't want a flood of permits just because we're going to raise impact fees that, like I said, don't have any intention of building anytime soon. And then we can bring this back to the actual board meeting on the 16th. Would you, I don't know, I think we already have workshops
I was
then.
going to say, what is our schedule like?
Strategic plan.
Do we even
starting
need
at
a
2.
workshop at that point?
We may not need a workshop then if
I think
everybody
not.
is
I think
emailed the
I think at that
information.
point, we'll probably just have to
We
go
beat
around
this thing
with
to
individual meetings and kind of do debrief before the next board meeting, not do another workshop.
And while we
on it.
haven't gone through the data again today, it is all in the PowerPoint. It's also, you have the complete Tyndall Oliver study as well as all the supporting data. And certainly individual conversations with any of us, with Frank, would be appropriate between now and the 16th.
I guess what we can do now is ask if there is anyone else that would like to comment. We would still allow for that briefly.
Lee Steinhauer, 1953 Clayton Heritage Road, Maitland. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the Greater Orlando Builders Association. We've been working with staff very well on this impact fee study and appreciate their time and input and working collaboratively with us. As you have in your packets, TPFG, our consultant, generated a memorandum in regards to Tyndall Oliver's study. There's a few items, we agree with a lot of what Tyndall Oliver has in their analysis, but there's a few items that we enumerate in that memorandum that we take issue with. First is the student station cost caps, which are statutory. They're enumerated by category: elementary, middle, high school. Based on Tyndall's analysis, they're over by 0.3%. Based on our analysis, which takes into account, we believe, the separate categories with the student station cost caps, and also their own number for high schools, which they come in at 29, and they try to use the 31 cap. But since they're at 29, and that's their actual cost under the impact fee, that would be their cap, if that makes sense. So if you do it with that analysis, which again we believe is the right way to do it under the statute, under the caps, you're actually 3% over the statutory caps. So that's one item that we have an issue with. Secondly, it's related to the way that it was calculated in terms of permanent existing inventory of facilities versus the future facilities, which is Tyndall used their existing inventory in 2014, and now they're using another analysis here in 2017, and we want to know, what was the change, what justifies that change, other than the generation of a higher fee. So it's just something we'd like to see some consistency on, 2014 versus 2017. Why was it acceptable there and not acceptable here? And as relates to the transportation, buses in particular, in previous studies, Tyndall has done it one way, and now they're doing it another way here. So we'd like to see some more consistency in the analysis. It gives us some predictability, and not just utilizing it to generate a different outcome. So those are some of the things that we'd like to talk about if we get a chance. If you guys are doing another workshop or work session to go over this.
We will not be. Have you seen the Tyndall Oliver's response?
Yes.
Yes.
You have.
It was part of the packet, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, appreciate the time.
Thank you. So, Board, if I'm hearing it, Dr. Pace correctly, we will take this matter up, not tonight, but at our January 16th meeting. All your questions and concerns need to be worked out between yourself, Mr. Kromenbacher, and Dr. Pace between now and that meeting, and then we will have discussion and then a vote at the regular scheduled board meeting on the 16th.
I suggest what we'll affirmatively do is schedule time with each of you ahead of time so that you can dialogue with us as a team and work through everything, hopefully.
Great. That's easy. So, do we want to have 5 minutes?
Yeah.
So we need to, we'll adjourn this workshop. We will convene at 4:10
Thank you. Good
for
job.
the facilities
Good job.
workshop, 4:10.